I'm so happy to be here, and it's such a pleasure, and I'm so humbled by all the introductions, so thank you so much. And I hope I'm going to stand up to the challenge, and that you're going to find it interesting, because I think it's slightly different perspective than the academic perspective, and it's definitely something that is coming, or I've been just doing in businesses where the drive and the direction is set by many different powers, like cost or revenue or the audience, rather than by the interest in growing the field. So anyway, I actually have a picture to what Alex was talking about, so I'm just going to skip that. One kind of additional thing that I'm doing at the moment, which might have influenced some of my slides, because you're going to see some grids and quadrants, which are very typical of MBA students, because I had realized over the last 2 years since I've been at the BBC, that is so huge and so weird, is that in order to really scale and deliver on the promise of data and science, you need to have some kind of a managerial capability, and the CAS Business School is helping me a lot with that. And in my spare time, so that's probably something beyond here, and hopefully something we can discuss over dinner, is I'm climbing really tall mountains. This is me on Aconcagua, the tallest peak in the South America. And I kind of wanted to mention this because I think, and you interact with students, and you kind of, preparing the next generation of people who are going to come to businesses and are going to do interesting projects there. Being in a new field and driving a new field in business is quite hard work, and I think you need to have a source of resilience. And one of the things that I would like to chat about is how do we protect people who come out of academia, like PhDs, and we hire a lot of PhDs, but their resilience is quite weak. So I would be very interested to hear your views. But yeah, what my recommendation is, go and climb the mountain, and that's helping. My team currently, so this is a snapshot of my team. So it's mostly made of data scientists, so people with computer science, mathematics, stats, but also astrophysics, and many kind of different domains, or genetics or biology domains that are kind of a mixing into that kind of a specific skill set. We have data engineers, so those are the people who are building our data pipelines to bring data into the system and be able to do something with it. And also we have software engineers, because as I'm going to try and prove during my talk, is that nothing really happens until there is software in place. And that is what we're really interested in. We also have people like product managers who are responsible for the actual product that is gonna somewhere leave at the end, either an internal system that our journalists are using or our editors are using, or the recommendation engine that is a kind of a technical capability that can be used by many other products. We also have BAs and team leads. Another discussion that we often get into is what is the kind of a workflow and how do you really deliver that. And business analysts and team leads and people who actually help us bring teams together are really, really key to that. Also, I'm not the only person doing my job at the BBC. There is a few of us. It's a massive organization. We are kind of divided into different areas. So not only sport, news, iPlayer, and different verticals that you probably know as an audience. We also have kind of a content production workflow or product. So people who are looking after specific technologies behind us. And because it's such a huge and diverse organization, not every single, but many of the departments would have their own data science teams, and we come together as a broader community and try to collaborate. Not without problems. There's a lot of politics. I'm sure you know it yourself. That is very, very present in those organizations as well. What we've done, I'm going to kind of touch on a few products or a few things, projects, but basically we look after a kind of a broad spectrum of things. So on one side we have reporting systems that deliver audience data directly to journalists through algorithm or algorithmic recommendation engines that go to our websites or to our apps. To things that are kind of managing the backend of some of products that you might know. So, for example, BBC weather data comes from Met Office, and then it's kind of transformed and computed, and it's delivered to our meteorologists and journalists. So this is within the scope of our team. So there's quite a broad range of things that we look after. What we don't do, and that's again, kind of like, this is one of the areas that is super interesting, but unfortunately that's not something I'm responsible for, and that's data journalism. So the things that you see sometimes on, whether on the websites or on telly, where we talk about big NHS ratings, or we talk about some spending that goes to the wrong places and is overused by government. All those things that are data related, so the knowledge and the journalism is based on data. That is it's an editorial side. We also don't build the infrastructure. So I mentioned data engineers. We need pipes that take data from sources and then put them somewhere, model them, and then we can use them. And a lot of the data sits in data lake. So that's our kind of like a common storage. Again, it's like a topic for another few hours to talk about the upsides and downsides and different structures. But that's something that I'm not specifically looking after within the team. As well, like insights and analytics, although one of the things that I'm going to try to say is that analytics and asking questions is absolutely crucial to deliver any of the data science solutions. Also GDPR, yet another topic. I'm just not going to even talk about this. So today, I kind of wanted to do something really interesting and start with a hypothesis, and I hope it's going to make sense. So what I would like to do today is to explore how data science as a field, as a department within media organization is driving disruption, but less so on the audience side, so demand side, which is very often a thing that is in the headlines, talked about. Audiences are not longer looking at BBC, they all go to Netflix and so on. So there is a lot of attention on the demand side, on the audience side, and also a lot of attention on, so how much money can you make for me? So when people hire data scientists, there is an expectation there's going to be buckets of cash flowing through the doors. I think this is less so our role. Than our role and the place where we can make a difference is on the supply side. So we're talking about all good operations and supply chains, and how do we take creative production and understand it through the lenses of operations and try to deliver gains in terms of productivity of journalists, content creators, editors, and so on. So that's what I'm going to try and prove today. So let's start with definition of what disruption is. I'm sure if anybody and I'm sure many of you here have a lot to do with economics and kind of a more broadly business classes. This book has been very kind of a key in terms of talking about what disruption is and how digital technologies specifically have impacted business models, and how the digital transformation is hurting quite a lot of businesses, and media is definitely one of them. If you think about BBC, we existing for the last 100 years, the normal kind of a decision making was happening in relation to the mass audiences. So people watch what I do. If I'm BBC, whatever I do, people are going to watch it, and that's fine. And this is how the choices were driven. opening new channel or opening new radio channel or opening websites or launching some new products was always kind of a perceived from the audience is going to come. And that because there is an absolute mass in front of television and in front of radios and so on. That is no longer true because the expectation from the audience is much more personal. So, and this is where the whole Netflix comes in and YouTube and so on. People are not necessarily waiting for BBC to come up with whatever they're interested in, especially young people. They just go to Facebook or they on Twitter or go to YouTube and this is where they get that from. So the choices from the BBC of being me and people gonna listen, read or watch what I do is just no longer present. So we are undergoing a big disruption and data is at the heart of it because the understanding of that personal relationship and actually ability for broadcasters and publishers to create a more personal relationship with the audience happen because of data. I suddenly know how many women visit my site. I know how many people interested in technology visit my site, and that changed dramatically how we operate and how people who use it very well, like YouTube or Netflix, create that relationship. So disruption is present, and specifically in media, it's quite big in a way. It's happening. So this is impact of my MBA, the kind of a lovely emerging cycle. What I just wanted to point out here is where we are in terms of the kind of at the stage of specific technologies that are related to kind of a broader data science. So what you probably can't see it, but this is the kind of the peak of inflated expectations, right? So like everybody talks about this, but nothing really happens. We can't really deliver anything. Machine learning and deep learning, that was, in terms of maths, we done maths long time ago, like we know what it is, but it's behind blockchain. Blockchain is ahead in terms of calming down this kind of inflated expectations and going through, okay, we're calming down now a little bit, which I find quite striking because I kind of, as a practitioner as well, I'm kind of would hope that we are a little bit more ahead comparing to other technologies, specifically like blockchain. But what it also says is that it is going to reach that kind of a plateau in about 2 to 5 years. There are also kind of coming back to that concept of disruption, there is also skeptics. So Gans would say, well, never mind, stop talking about this, it's not disruption, it's just normal. Technology changes, get over yourself, fix it, and move on. And it's not necessarily like a big thing about it. So that's kind of a more skeptical view to changing technologies. All of this together, however, it does create quite a lot of attention. So we see in papers all the time, scandals, reports, jobs are taken, robots are stepping in. The scandals like Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and kind of a general, very negative signals from the places where data or application of data and algorithms were pioneered in a way at that scale. So I think the result of this is that people are quite scared, and if you look at the interest on Google, robots take over is Google 3 times more than a few years ago. So people think about it. It's kind of generating quite a big, kind of a maybe negative vibe around this. On the other hand, however, we also have quite a lot of kind of a solid evidence that is coming up, and there is kind of a lot of research comparing different companies and different organizations and how using big data in kind of data in any form, whether it's data for analytics or it's data for data applications or it's data for kind of fully automating certain processes, that there is a positive relationship with application of data and using this. But that evidence kind of is not yet consistent. There is no kind of a framework for doing this. We don't have a template really, or we don't have a template for kind of, have understanding what is the real, what am I going to get for investment, basically. So I can't read all this and go to my CTO and say, like, okay, if we're going to do this, we definitely going to have 20% of return or anything. So it's quite inconsistent yet, but it is starting happening. Good time for definitions. I'm not sure how we feel about definitions. I mean, I'm just going to flick through this because I think everybody, we all have our sources and places where all those things are defined, and specifically in terms of terms and how do we use terms. So data science versus machine learning versus AI, what are the differences? I think there is a kind of, to me, again, coming from the practitioner perspective, and RSS would just absolutely kill me if I said it like in the office. To me, it's all kind of the same thing. It's just a range of projects and portfolio that applies different methodologies to different problems. Probably step change happens with AI, where we're talking about something that is much more complicated, and also probably something that, while we can use some of the methods, something that doesn't quite live yet in the newsroom. Like, there is no kind of a truly true AI in the newsroom at this stage. But worth pointing out as well is that the term is becoming much more open these days, and I think that partly it is because there is a drive and there is a will from investors, from kind of buy-in, just general buy-in to use it. So we know that if you have a startup and you call your startup AI something, you're much likely to get funds. Turing Institute itself has added AI to its portfolio to be able to easier access to funds. The universities will open AI-related fields and faculties to get more attention. And it's not a bad thing. This is how it functions. But I think the definition is opening up a little bit because of that. So, this all means that there is quite a lot of buzz, maybe fear, kind of a conversation, and also a clear signs of disruption that is coming with data. So, what do the editors, so people who actually effectively run the company at the BBC, they own the content, they produce the content, what do they think about what should we do? And the latest 2019 Reuters Institute report, so Nick Newman is one of the people who is very well known, and he kind of with his researcher group on behalf of Reuters Institute and the Oxford Institute publishes this report about the state and what we should all do and where we are in terms of technologies and overall trends in the industry. So you can see that top thing, the top of the graph says that about 78% of editors agree or strongly agree with the kind of a notion that they need to invest in AI. And again, AI understood in a broader term. However, they also don't believe that this is to replace journalists. So I think there's still kind of a perception that we need to, yes, invest in technology, but we also still need to invest in our content makers, which is a good kind of a setting ground or giving us a good direction in terms of being in the newsroom and applying and building those solutions. Generally as well, from my experience, I would kind of divide the organizations or places that I worked in into kind of four groups, and it's all kind of dependent on the propensity to innovate, so a aptitude for risk, so looking forward, which in times of disruption is incredibly important, because if there is a disruptive technology and you're not willing to innovate, you have a problem, because you're just not going to do anything, and the cost of not doing anything is larger than failing by doing. So propensity to innovate is one of the dimensions, and the other dimension that goes across it is the knowledge about technology and understanding what and how, which means that if you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and also you're quite high likely to take risks, you are in that positive quadrant of positive ROI. So people like Washington Post or Axel Springer, who was one of the early media organizations who really committed to change through digital technologies and through data, they really benefited from that and survived on a very kind of a positive profits all along. People like and this is not to say, oh, these guys are completely wrong or anything, but I think there was an element and there was a wave of companies that employed data science teams, and then they fired them because they didn't know what to do with them. And good for me, because then I hired all of them. But there was this kind of a wave of people who just didn't know what to do, so the investment didn't quite returned. I think BBC is somewhere here. So BBC is kind of like, they don't really know. We have a very low propensity to risk, because if something falls, that's really bad. Like, there is this perception of, if the Queen dies, we must really, really be on top of things. And that is actually something that is quite hard to deliver when you start innovating and that takes risks, because the scale is not there, because things may fail. So that kind of a propensity to risk is not really there. But I think there is quite a growing technical knowledge and understanding of what the problems are, and hopefully I'll be able to give some examples, but I think we're getting a little bit better. However, I think what we suffer, and a lot of organizations, especially big organizations, suffer, is underinvestment and a bit of so-called incrementalism. So we kind of do, instead of like really saying and committing to let's do it, let's automate this process, or let's really reinvent the way our app works, we're kind of doing a little bit. So it's a little bit, and it's good because it creates improvement and learning, but it doesn't kind of get us to the finish line quick enough. So I think that's the challenge. Like practical advice, what I learned from this is that it's very good to kind of map your idols into that map, because often what happens with a lot of people who come in and join the teams, and it's like, yeah, we totally should just start doing what Netflix does and do this. It's like, really, was that thing that Netflix done in that point really profitable? Were they really thinking through what they were doing, or it's just publicity? So I think it's worth mapping the things of people or organizations that you look up to onto that space. Did it really work? So this is a bit of not a framework, it's just a few boxes, but it kind of describes the way I think about projects, and I think the way we gaining funding and buy-in so that we can scale and deliver. So always start with the problem, and machine learning is not a problem. There is no machine learning problem. There is a business problem that can be solved through machine learning. And I think that's a really important distinction, because because our teams are quite scientific in a way. Like the proportion of people with high degrees in our teams is much higher than in many other teams, and there is often kind of that really, like, it's so tempting to just go and do this really cool thing, but and especially with all this data that we have, but it doesn't really address a business problem, and that's and kind of a thing that needs to start, because when you go into investment committees, and I'm sure you've been to many of them, applying for grants and so on, you always need to explain why you're doing this, and you're going to be asked a lot at the BBC, because they also not necessarily, you know, kind of giving away a lot of funds for nothing. So it's really important. With problem, if we can describe problem well and come up with a solution, we're getting investment, and investment is a real key, because without funding, you're not able to hire people, you're not able to buy infrastructure, you're not able to buy data sources, and so on. So investment, it's just a function of a commitment, and it's absolutely necessary. So you can get your data, get your skills, establish a process of collaboration, cooperation. Nothing kind of happens in the lab. I know it's weird to say that here, but in the big business like this, unless you are in R&D, which is absolutely perfectly fine to do it in a lab because you are in a lab, but everywhere outside you're not in a lab, and everything happens within the organization. So the process needs to be there. And then I mentioned software. Software is what is actually the outcome of all this, and the culture. Culture is another massive topic, and we could talk about this forever. But how that impacts the culture of the organization, and that comes back to that quadrant, and how more likely we are to do stuff, how more risky we are, how do we change and evolve as an organization. Culture is a massive challenge. It's a massive challenge at the BBC, with a editorially led agenda, which is beautiful, but also it's extremely challenging for technologists. So we define a problem, and the problem is that young people don't care. That young people not necessarily are that interested in the BBC. And it's a problem because when they grow up, they're not going to be also interested in the BBC, and you know, the whole kind of a model breaks. So it's a big challenge that is really recognized, and it's not only about young people, it's about other diversities, it's about geography, very London-centric, and I think it's a big challenge. And I think actually Birkbeck, from our conversations, is, you know, this is the kind of a thought process that we have, you have here as well. So I'm gonna now show something that we've done to start addressing that problem. So one of the ideas, the early ideas to address the fact that not many people are coming, or not many young people are coming to the newsroom, not to the newsroom, we don't want everybody in the newsroom, but we want people to come and read our content, is that if we give people information about why, then they're gonna be able to address it. So really delivering data about the performance of the online content in that case is gonna deliver learning. So we've built a telescope, which is a real-time reporting tool that was designed to do specifically that. And by the way, no machine learning, no AI. This is not a magic box, a magic kind of a box, but it's a really pretty and accessible interface. So let me show this. So this is our website. If we go to any of the articles, we can go to the tool called Telescope and log in. And what this is showing is that this article, Rain or Shine, it's gonna tell us on a kind of a nearly minute-by-minute basis how many people have seen that article. And also it updates within probably about 15-minute delay. So it's really great for journalists because things are happening so quickly in the newsroom that the moment that the article is published, they want to know how is it doing. Should I write more about this? Should I investigate this? What it also tells you is how far it went on social media, or like even, by the way, this one. So for example, was that article popular on other platforms? This information here, like the fact that 90% of the traffic came from BBC, means that it's not very good because it wasn't really very popular on social media. Nobody searched for it. Everybody who came to that article came from the main page. So maybe the headline is not very optimized for people to search for it. Another piece of information here is about demographics. So you can see that this article was quite male skewed, and also 30% of 18 to 34. So that is below the national the population, and it tells you more about engagement and how things are doing and so on. So this tool has been our kind of a first product that was very specific to the data, and it wasn't very complicated. It's about taking real-time data and just displaying it in a nice interface to the end user. So to say to the journalist what is really happening with the content. What it really changed, however, is that it kind of built trust in numbers, and it built trust in statistics. And I think that the nature of journalists is to question. So trust was an absolute key here, so that the numbers that we show to them, they feel like it's right. So the question is, did it really work? As in, did it impact our initial problem? This is a flat line. That doesn't quite satisfy us. Maybe it stopped some of the decline, but it didn't quite encourage growth. So, but what we do know is that culture within the newsroom has changed a bit. So even though the actual delivery or empowering people with data didn't make direct impact on the numbers, it changed the way we operate. And that's really big because they wouldn't do it before. And they wouldn't necessarily look or ask for numbers. And that's also bad because if you don't have understanding of how your content performs, you can't really change anything. And this is the kind of like overall telescope view. So we also track how frequently journalists are using the tool. And it's pretty big. It goes into 100,000 for a month for our about 2,000 journalists. She didn't say that, so I just want to make sure it is deep fake. So what do we do next? So the next thing is that kind of coming back to this disruption and the buzz and everybody talking about Netflix doing recommendations and everybody talking about we need to go and connect directly with the audience through our applications, through web apps, through the website. And we need to really bring the content to them. Personalization became a massive topic and thing that's going to drive the change. Those two numbers were the most frequently repeated numbers I heard of last few years. 35 is the percent of sales that Amazon drives through recommendation engine, and $1 million is the value, the estimated value by Netflix of their recommendation engine. So everybody was talking about, well, if they do it, we should totally do it. Recommendations are next big thing. And great, like it was great for me. This is exactly why I got the job at the BBC, because we build a case around this. We build a case to say, if you invest in recommendation engines, you're gonna get return. When I came, the first website that we've built a recommender on was Mundo website. I think I have here examples. So this is the BBC Mundo, which is one of the World Service sites, and it goes to Latin America. This box here is the algorithmically generated recommendation. So this is the outcome. This is what we've built. But before we started, we looked at different groups of people, so segmented people, and then we realized that they have very different needs and very different way of behaving. And the way to read this is that there is a correlation between how many page views within the visits people have on the website, so how many clicks I'm doing through different articles, and how likely I'm to come back. And that was real key to understanding, or to really convince ourselves that this is a good idea, to put those recommenders, those links, and drive people to consume more when they landed on the page, so they are more likely to come back. And World Service is really interested in that, because they really have not many ways to grow audiences in those regions. But building recommenders at the BBC is not that easy. I'm going to talk here about tagging, which we talked about before the lecture. And it's not trivial because of few reasons. I mean, there's many reasons, and a lot of them just people rather than technology. But first of all, despite the fact that there is loads of data everywhere, there is still not enough data, and there is still not enough relevant data to the problem. Also, what editorial teams very quickly realized is that they're going to lose control. So if we're going to start changing the way the website or the article page, so that website that you you land and you read your article, is out of their control, because we're starting to put things via algorithms rather than they control. And then the third problem is the ethical side. And that's another lecture to talk about this. But there is the, how this disruptive and destructive using robotically generated lists and recommendations are going to be to our audience. So the first problem that I was talking about is related to not enough data. In order to build a recommender for the articles, you need to know a bit about the article. I mean, there are different ways, and I'm sure you probably, in research and so on, you can classify recommendation engines in many ways. But generally, one of the data points that you definitely need is the knowledge about the content. So you need to know some tagging, you need to have some kind of a tagging, you need to have some kind of a labels about the content, so that you understand whether this piece of content is completely different than another one, or it's maybe in the same group, and so on. So the tagging system, the information about data is crucial to build a recommender. Another data point that you could potentially use is information about user. But in the case of World Service, we didn't quite have any information about the user, because most of the people are anonymous, so there is no registration. You can't log into the website, which is probably a good thing. And also, most of the people only come for one visit, one page, and they are gone. So the so-called cold start, or the one-hit wonder problem, in which users don't really build a lot of history, you don't really build a lot of information. So really, what we're left with was the content. What this is showing is, when we look at, because don't get me wrong, we do have tagging. Tagging exists, and actually it's a manual process of every journalist who written an article. They need to say what this article is about, who has been mentioned in that article. But they don't do it, because why? And also because it's complicated, and they need to just push content out very quickly. So there's no incentive really for them to do it. apart from me saying, like, hey, we need to know a lot about your content. Yeah, so, and it's really difficult to enforce that process. So when we look at our tagging, we put it on a kind of a spikiness kind of axis, which is reflective of persistency of the tag. So imagine, for example, Brexit. No, don't imagine Brexit. But the Brexit as a label of the last, 2 years, it's a pretty persistent tag. Like there is every day there is something written about Brexit. So that Brexit is probably somewhere here because it's like it's super persistent. So it's not spiky. So it's somewhere here. And also, it has a very high coverage because we've written a lot about this. So Brexit is definitely somewhere here. Here, something that is super spiky and we don't really write about. So like there would be tags about some obscure topic that we just published about. For example, there was this one article about red squirrels of the last 12 months. So red squirrel would be probably somewhere here because we don't really write about it that much. And also it just kind of appeared once within the time frame, which kind of destroys the whole idea of having consistent understanding of different groups on topics that your content is about. And this area in the red, this is what I'd love to have populated. Like that distribution should be pretty much full here. So I should have, I still should have Brexit somewhere here. That's fine. But I also should have something like business impact of Brexit on business and impact of Brexit on education, and have some kind of a subcategories that not necessarily subcategories in a taxonomy sense, but subcategories in terms of semantic understanding of the specific topic, and that's empty, and that means that I can't really use it in recommendations because they're just not going to be consistent. So what we've done instead, and again that comes back to, okay, we're at the BBC, they gave us some money to do it. I can't just come back and it's like, oh, excuse me, I don't have right data. I need to do something else to really deliver on the promise. So what we started to do is thinking about how can we enrich our tagging system that has challenges with something that is automatically populated. And then that's how we got into vectorization. So vectorization is really it could be interpreted as a topical space. So what we've used here, we used a LDA, so latent dirichlet allocation models that are blindly and in an unsupervised way looking for topics within a large bucket of content. And luckily, BBC has lots of content, so we can quite easily use that content to train models and understand how much broad topics we have, and with that, we can then use those distributions of topics as a vector. And having vector is like the best thing ever for data scientists, because that means that I can do anything with this text. I can calculate distances between them. I can multiply and create clusters of content. I can add them when, for example, I am going through multiple articles, vectors of articles. I can create profiles of people and so on. So there were massive opportunities with that. And this is how we did it. So used exactly the LDA I mentioned to generate the vectors as a representation of topics. Then we used distance measures between those vectors to understand which articles are similar and therefore generate list of similar articles that are going to be your recommendations. However, similarity of the computer, so what computer mathematically understands as similarity is not necessarily what the human understands as similarity. And this is where the controlling power of editorial came to play, and like, no, this is impossible. The articles that you just identify as similar are not really similar. We need to change the algorithm. And fair enough. there are choices in building the algorithm that you make in order to generate an outcome. And one of the choices that you do in the topical algorithms or the topic detection algorithm is how many topics you're looking for. And that's a key for recommenders, because if you choose too few topics, so let's say we would choose 2 topics for all BBC content, we would have one topic news and the other one sport. That's not a very, if I recommend one article or 2 articles within my news topic, they might have been completely different. They might have been IS and Love Island, or something that is actually very, very far away. If I create too many topics, I might go too tight and recommend basically the same content, which is also not that much interesting for the audience, because they just read this stuff, so they don't need to read 3 times the same thing. So the choice of the topics became something that we used with humans. So the way to decide how many topics, we involved editorial to help us with that. So we created different tests, and we created one test. So basically created different models for generating topics, presenting similar articles based on those models, and asking editors to tell us whether they also think that those articles are similar. So basically we're comparing the human input with the machine output, and then looking for the best kind of a compromise. So they would basically see 2 articles and tell us, okay, are they similar or are they not similar? And based on that, we decided, okay, the kind of a weighted average of the similarity measure between the human and the machine is maximized. So we've chosen 50 topics to create vectors based on that 50 dimensions. Anything weird happening here? Is that something that you would expect? Do you have any questions at this stage? I shall move on. So coming back to that business kind of a components, while solving the young audiences problem, we've built a tool to give people more information about how their content is doing. We built recommenders, done all this, sorted. We measured the impact. Looks like we have some upside in terms of the clicks. So comparing 2 different versions, people click more on the algorithmically generated recommendations. That's a win. Still flat line. But the good news again was that actually in that whole process, we kind of didn't quite move the line. It's not like suddenly many people started to, mass readership of our Mundo website or any other website where the recommenders were deployed. But the reports that we were getting is that the people who were used to kind of manually search and look for links that they can put on the article to make it more interesting to people and keep them on the website and really kind of get through masses of content to understand, to just basically find links to put on the article. They don't have to do it suddenly, and that translated in a significant time saving. And I think that became our main value that we've delivered through recommenders. So it's not so much about the audience value, it was much more recognized as something that's going to save me time. Questions? Again, this is like a completely different lecture, and I think we can talk about this for loads of time, and I'm running out of time. Filter bubbles and echo chambers and all that, I think we took it quite scientifically. We understood the difference between the two. It's about how people connect with each other or how people communicate with each other, and we came up with the way to measure this. What this showed is that people are very concentrated around topics, but which indicates more of the echo chamber challenge than kind of a connect with our content creators. But again, that's a completely different topic. But I think the important bit is that we think about this, and when we build our recommenders, and whether it's generating vectors and then using it for recommendations, we measure the impact of that. So, and try to display transparent information about this and so on. Tony Hall stood up a few months ago talking about public service algorithm. Again, this is not a new concept, but it's a kind of a concept that we used as kind of to facilitate conversation with our editorial policy, with our management, and so on. And I think it has been quite successful in delivering on that, and especially when it comes to privacy issues and interactions with people, that's something that is very important. But again, we can talk about this for more later on. We had to nearly, again, coming back to what we've delivered and where the value went. So it looks like it's all about saving people time rather than driving more people to the website. We have to come back and redefine the problem again and really understand what is happening behind this. Like why there is no more people coming to the site. And this is where I got really into the other side of disruption, and that kind of a concept of it is not about the front end, it's about the back end. It's not about the audience, it's about your content and the core of your business, and it's about the supply of the journalists. It's about supply of the content. I then read a book called Prediction Machines. It's I highly recommend it. You might find it really boring because it's very simply written. But I gave it to Tony Hall, and he really read it. So I'm really proud of that. That's like my biggest achievement at the BBC. But I think that kind of a whole concept of starting to think about machine learning and data it opened my mind on that, and I think it kind of talks more about the economics of the solutions and the how much it's going to save the cost rather than generate the value, and then really feel like this is exactly what is happening at the BBC. So we started to dig around that problem and really kind of think about what is the real root cause for the fact that we build recommenders, people know what they're doing, and we're still not quite delivering the audience upside as we wanted to. And what it turns out is that this graph here, the distribution here, is showing the content classified by who is interested in that content. So over 55s have a lot of content for them. There is probably majority of the content that is predominantly of interest to older generations. 35s, so the under 35s are at a loss. We just don't generate enough content that they would be predominantly interested in. So what we need to do is we need to balance that distribution. But also in the personalized world, it's not only about balancing, but also about more of it, because we have more niche and smaller segments of the user. So I think actually to redefine the problem for the newsroom is the fact that we can't really afford at the moment, in the way that we work, we can't afford to produce enough content for all the audiences that we're trying to use. And that's something that we're trying to solve now and think about this in a different way. So if you think about our lovely design of all recommendation systems, they can be amazing, but if we don't have enough content to put into to fuel this machine, it's never going to work. So this is a kind of a next venture and something that we already started working on. It's about identifying areas in the production process, from planning, creating to publication, that we can support with data, or we can automate different stages of the process. So tagging, for example, where people had to put labels on the content, and by the way, they didn't really do it very well. we're going to automate. Not fully, because we still need that human verification, but we're going to use machines to increase that productivity. So I think that's the kind of, again, coming back to that supply chain, this is a conceptual venture or future of all those solutions. So in summary, I still think I still stand by my initial kind of a statement that data is a disruption. I think that the rate of change of the kind of expectation of the audience and of our clients internally as well is raising very quickly. Data is disrupting established markets like media, like healthcare, like education, and many other areas that maybe are only at the beginning of that journey as well. Second point is about that problem. I don't think that we could have, on day one, we would be like, oh yeah, I know what it is, too much content for over 55s. Like, I don't think we've been at that stage. I think we had to go through that journey. But we definitely learned that you can't start with science. You have to start with the problem and really understanding it. Asking questions at all stages, and they're kind of a really simple business questions about, hey, what is your core business? Oh, is it journalist? Yeah. So kind of it works when you think about this. Yeah, it's all about journalists or journalism and a lot of it. And also, as I mentioned, it is a journey, and sometimes innovation fails, or a lot of it fails, and you just need to kind of be brave. And I think that's a big challenge for organizations like the BBC to kind of get over that fear of, oh my God, what's going to happen? Because we just need to start moving on and delivering. So I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening.